If you crash every afternoon, the first thing people tell you to fix is lunch, right? Eat lighter, eat heavier, eat fewer carbs, eat more protein or less protein. That advice is incomplete at best and misleading at worst because the afternoon crash is rarely caused by what you ate at noon. It's caused by what your body was forced to compensate long before lunch. So here's the myth that we're going to kill right now. The afternoon crash is not a meal problem. It's a systems problem. Lunch, that's just where the bill comes due. High performers tend to experience this crash in a very specific way, and you'll probably recognize this. You start the day strong, morning focus is decent, caffeine works, and then sometime between about 1 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything drops. Energy, focus, motivation. You feel heavy, you feel foggy, impatient, and the instinctive response is to fix the surface. More caffeine, a snack, maybe a walk. Those might help temporarily, but they don't solve the cause because the cause started much earlier. Here's what's actually happening. Your body has a finite capacity to regulate energy, stress, and attention at the same time. Every morning, you begin spending from that reserve. Cognitive demand, decision making, pressure, deadlines, all of that draws from the same system. Now, if that system is already compromised, the crash doesn't wait until evening. It shows up in the afternoon. Now, let's talk about blood sugar for a second because this is where people get really distracted. Yes, blood sugar matters, but not in the simplistic way that it's usually explained. The issue isn't that lunch spikes your blood sugar. The issue is that your system can't stabilize it efficiently anymore. When blood sugar rises and falls quickly, the body compensates by releasing stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. These temporarily restore energy and focus, but they come at a cost. They burn reserves. So, what feels like a blood sugar crash is often a stress hormone rebound, and that rebound feels awful. You get shaky, irritable, mentally slow. And now layer cortisol timing into this. Cortisol is supposed to work in a rhythm, higher in the morning, gradually tapering throughout the day. Under chronic stress, that rhythm flattens. So by early afternoon, cortisol drops too low to sustain alertness. Your body responds by pushing harder, more stress hormones, more compensation. And this works, for a while, but by mid-afternoon, the system hits a wall, and that is the crash. Here's a critical piece that a lot of people miss. None of this has anything to do with discipline, and very little to do with food quality at lunch. This is what happens when the nervous system has been running hot for too long. You wake up already partially depleted. You burn through more reserves in the morning. Lunch becomes the tipping point, not the cause. And this is why changing lunch, sometimes it helps, but many times it doesn't, because you're addressing the trigger, not the setup. So let's address the elephant in the room. If the crash were simply about lunch, then why does caffeine also stop working? Why does more food make it worse for some people? And why does this show up more after you're 40? It's because the underlying systems that buffer energy are less resilient. They're not broken, they're just overused. Look at it this way. The afternoon crash is not your body failing. It's your body signaling that compensation is no longer sustainable. That signal is very valuable. If you listen to it, you can fix this relatively quickly. If you ignore it and keep layering caffeine and snacks on top, it's going to get worse. So the real question isn't, what should I eat for lunch? The better question is this: why does my system need to compensate so hard by early afternoon? And that is where the solution lives. Because once you understand that, the fix stops being guesswork. Now let's break down what's actually happening inside your body when that afternoon crash hits. Because Once you see the mechanics, the confusion disappears. We'll start with blood sugar, but we're not going to stop there. Blood sugar is not the villain. Instability is the villain. When you eat lunch, glucose enters the bloodstream. That's absolutely normal. In a resilient system, insulin clears that glucose efficiently and energy stays steady. In a stress system, that process is sloppy. Glucose rises faster, insulin overshoots, blood sugar drops too quickly. Your body interprets that drop and everything going on with it as a threat. So it does what it's designed to do. It releases stress hormones. Adrenaline to raise blood sugar quickly, cortisol to keep it elevated, and that hormonal response restores your energy briefly. But it's borrowed energy. And borrowed energy always comes with interest. So what you feel as a crash is often the aftershock of that stress response wearing off. Now here's where a lot of explanations will stop. And that's a mistake because blood sugar instability alone doesn't explain why this happens every day. For that, we need to talk about things like cortisol timing. Cortisol is your alertness hormone. It's supposed to peak in the morning and then slowly decline throughout the day. Under chronic stress, that curve flattens. Okay, so by early afternoon, cortisol is already too low to support focus and energy. So that leaves a gap. Your body fills that gap with emergency signals, more adrenaline, more compensation. Again, this works temporarily until it doesn't. So now let's layer in the nervous system. High performers spend most of their day in a sympathetic state, alert, problem solving, decision making. That's not bad, but it is expensive. The nervous system has limited capacity to maintain that state without recovery. By early afternoon, neural fatigue is setting in. It's not sleepiness, it's fatigue. The circuits responsible for attention and executive function become less efficient. Focus feels harder. Irritation will increase and your decision-making capabilities will slow. This is why some people feel mentally exhausted, even if their body feels fine. Now, here's a piece that's going to tie a lot of this together. Mitochondria. Mitochondria produce energy inside your cells. They are also highly sensitive to stress hormones and inflammation. So chronic stress impairs mitochondrial efficiency. So even if fuel is available, energy production can't keep up with demand. This creates a mismatch. High demand, low usable energy. The afternoon is where that mismatch becomes obvious because by then, your reserves are depleted. And this is why the crash feels sudden. It's not sudden, it's cumulative. So let's connect this all back to lunch. Lunch becomes the trigger because digestion diverts blood flow to the gut. That temporarily reduces blood flow to the brain. In a resilient system, that's barely noticeable. But in a stress system, it's enough to push things over the edge. So the brain experiences less fuel, less oxygen, less hormonal support, and the crash hits. This is why changing lunch sometimes helps and sometimes doesn't. If the system is already fragile, there is no perfect meal that's going to save it. And this is why caffeine becomes a crutch. Caffeine artificially stimulates the nervous system and blocks fatigue signals. It does not restore energy. It simply masks the deficit, which means when it wears off, the crash is that much worse. So here's a very important distinction. The afternoon crash is not caused by one single thing. It's caused by stacked inefficiencies, blood sugar instability, cortisol mistiming, nervous system fatigue, mitochondrial underperformance. Lunch is just where all of that collides. So here's the good news. Because this is a systems problem, it's absolutely fixable. You don't need perfect meals. You don't need to eliminate carbs. You don't need endless caffeine. You need to remove the need for compensation. So the real question becomes this. If the afternoon crash is a result of your system running out of margin, what would happen if you restored that margin instead of pushing through it? And that's what we're going to look at solving next. Because now that you understand what's actually driving the afternoon crash, the fix becomes much clearer. And it's not about finding the perfect lunch. It's about removing the need for your body to compensate. So the first thing to understand is this. Your afternoon crash is a margin problem. By early afternoon, your system has already spent most of its capacity just managing demand. So the goal is not to push through the crash. The goal is to stop draining margin so aggressive earlier in the day. And that starts in the morning. If you begin your day with unstable blood sugar, your body's already playing defense. If you're skipping breakfast, relying only on caffeine, eating something that spikes and crashes the glucose quickly, all of those force hormones to do the job that food and metabolism should be doing. So by the time lunch arrives, you're already behind. The second piece is cortisol timing. If your morning routine is chaotic, reactive, and high pressure from the moment you wake up, cortisol gets burned early. That leaves less available later on. So when the natural dip occurs in the early afternoon, there's nothing left to buffer it. This is why some people feel best first thing in the morning and feel so much worse by midday. They are front-loading stress. Now let's talk about that lunch again, but correctly this time. Lunch should support stability, not create another demand spike. This doesn't mean tiny meals. It means meals that don't force large swings. Enough protein to stabilize glucose, enough fat to slow absorption, and carbohydrates that don't hit you all at once. And a reminder, the goal is not perfection. The goal is predictability. Now here's a big one that almost nobody addresses. Movement. Not workouts, movement. Because sitting in a high cognitive state for hours without changing posture or circulation taxes the nervous system, and it taxes it hard. By early afternoon, blood flow is sluggish. The brain is underfueled. So a short walk, light movement, or posture change improves circulation, and it reduces the load on the stress systems. This is not about burning calories, it's about restoring flow. So let's address caffeine, honestly, as well. Caffeine is not evil, but it is a loan. If you use it to compensate for an already depleted system, you deepen the deficit. If you use it strategically on top of a stable foundation, it works great. The problem isn't caffeine itself, it is dependence on caffeine. So when caffeine becomes required for baseline function, the system's already compromised. The final piece to this whole puzzle is mitochondrial support. You don't need supplements to start, you need consistency, stable blood sugar, lower stress signaling, adequate recovery. Because when mitochondria aren't being constantly asked to produce emergency energy, they recover. When they recover, energy stops being something that drops out from under you in midday. And here's the most important mindset shift. The afternoon crash is not a sign that you're getting old. It's not a sign that you need to eat less, train harder, or drink more coffee. It's a sign that your system is running without enough buffer. And that is fixable very quickly in many cases, and not by hacking lunch, but by restoring stability across the day. When you do that, something changes. Afternoons stop feeling like survival mode. Focus becomes accessible again, and energy doesn't disappear at 2 o'clock. Not because you forced it, but because your body no longer needs to compensate. If this helped you understand why your afternoons fall apart even when mornings feel fine, subscribe to the channel. This channel exists purely to explain why high performance hits invisible walls and how to rebuild the systems that prevent those walls. If you want a deeper breakdown on restoring energy, focus, and resilience, check the links in the description, because the afternoon crash is not inevitable. It is simply feedback. And now you know how to respond to it. I'll talk to you all very soon. Take care.